So good morning, everyone. Is this turned on? Can everybody hear me okay? Good. So it'll be okay for folks out in Zoom, too. Well, I'm Kimberly Roberts. Welcome this morning. It's so good to see you. My pronouns are she and her. I want to welcome you to this hour of worship. We come together to share in life's meaning and grow in care and community, and to open our hearts and minds to the sacred truth known by so many names. Whatever your heritage, however your history, and whomever you love, you are welcome here. The space that we make sacred by our presence is where our doubts and our anger and our pain are every bit as welcome as our certainties, our joy, and our resilience. It's the place we come to renew our spirits in the embrace of our community and our life-affirming faith. Our guest speaker this morning is Marc Petrequin. Marc's been a member of this fellowship for a long time, and he is a returning summer speaker. So welcome, Marc. Glad to have you in the pulpit. If you are visiting here on Zoom or in person, if you'd like to introduce yourself, we'd like to officially say hi. I know the McGraths are here, so welcome today. Thank you for coming, and please stay for coffee. Anybody on Zoom new? Anyone speaking up back there that you see? I don't see anything on the chat. So we would love to support you in your spiritual journey. And if we could, it's time for our prelude.
Should have stayed, were the signs I ignored. Can I help you not to hurt anymore? We saw brilliance when the world was asleep. There are things that we can have but can't keep. If they say, who cares if one more light goes out in the sky of a million stars? It flickers, flickers. Who cares when someone's time runs out? If a moment is all we are, or quicker, quicker. Who cares if one more light goes out? Well, I do. The reminders pull the floor from your feet. In the kitchen, one more chair than you need. Oh, and you're angry, and you should be. It's not fair. Just 'cause you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there. If they say, who cares if one more light goes out in the sky of a million stars? It flickers, flickers. Who cares when someone's time runs out? If a moment is all we are, or quicker, quicker. Who cares if one more light goes out? Well, I do. flickers, flickers. Who cares when someone's time runs out? If a moment is all we are, or quicker, quicker. Who cares if one more light goes out? Well, I do. Well, I do.
Thank you, Mark. That was a beautiful prelude. I'm glad you chose that. I wanted to let you know that there are a couple of announcements, and I'm going to make them after the postlude today. To laugh often and love much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the approval of honest critics and endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to give of oneself, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, or a redeemed social condition, to have played and laughed with enthusiasm and sung with exultation, to know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded. And that was written by Ralph Waldo Emerson. So if you would, won't you all join me and rise in body or spirit as we sing our hymn number 6, Just As Long As I Have Breath, and you'll be able to sing along. We have accompaniment on our video screens.
Just as long as I have breath, I must answer yes to life. Though with pain I made my way, still with hope I meet each day. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to life. Just as long as vision lasts, I must answer yes to truth. In my dream and in my dark, always that elusive spark. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to truth. Just as long as my heart breaks, I must answer yes to love. Disappointment pierced me through, still I kept on loving you. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to love.
Let there be light. Let it shine in the dark places, in moments of pain, in times of grief, in the darkness of hatred, violence, oppression, where there's discouragement and despair. Wherever darkness is to be put to flight, let there be light. So if we could stop recording for our candles of sharing. Ours is a welcoming community where we find connection, a spiritual community where we find meaning. Ours is a shared community where our joys are amplified, and a caring community where our sorrows are lessened. We take this moment this morning to reflect on our joys and sorrows and acknowledge the mutual support of this community. Now's the time for everyone or anyone to briefly share a joy, a sorrow, or a gratitude, something that you're carrying deep within your heart this morning. And just a gentle reminder that this is not a time for announcements. And if you're sharing for somebody else, just make sure that you have their permission to do so. So if you're in the sanctuary, you can come up and use the microphone, and I'll help you with lighting the candles. And if you're on Zoom and you'd like to share, just put a note in the chat, either what you'd like to share and that you'd like me to share it, or just that you'd like to speak, and I'll let you know when you can unmute, and I'll light the candle for you here. So would anyone like to share this morning? Now, as we enter into a moment of silence, did this go back on? As we enter into a moment of silence, I invite you to please share the first name of someone who needs our prayers. Michael.
Lily.
Amen. So as you all know, one of the many ways that we care for one another is through our offering to support the mission of this congregation, the contributions that allow us to serve those who are seeking our message. And with your financial gift, we're able to provide our ministries of pastoral care, social justice, and community care. And for those of you who are on Zoom, if you'd like to give this morning, we have a link on the website, UUFHC.net. It's super easy to do, and you can make your donation securely via credit card. And you can also get our mailing address if you'd like to mail a check. And always, as always, thank you, everyone, for helping us to reach all who yearn for our inclusive and loving religious community.
I dreamed I was missing. You were so scared, but no one would listen, 'cause no one else cared. After my dreaming, I woke with this fear. What am I leaving when I'm done here? So if you're asking me, I want you to time comes, forget the one that I've done. Help me leave behind some reasons to be missed. And don't resent me. And when you're feeling empty, keep me in your memory. Leave out all the rest. Leave out all the rest. Don't be afraid of taking my beating, of shit that I made. I'm strong on the surface, not all the way through. I've never been perfect, but neither have you. So if you're asking me, I want you to know, when my time comes, forget the one that I've done. Help me leave behind some reasons to be missed. Don't resent me. And when you're feeling empty, keep me in your memory. Leave out all the rest. Leave out all the rest. Forgetting all the hurt inside you've learned you had so well. Pretending someone else can come and save me from myself. I can't be who you are. When my time comes, forget the wrong that I've done. Help me leave behind some reasons to be missed. Don't resent me. And when you're feeling empty, keep me in your memory. Leave out all the rest. Leave out all the rest. Forgetting all the hurt inside you've learned you had so well. Pretending someone else can come and save me from myself. I can't be who you are. I can't be who you are.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Marc Petrequin, a member here of UUFHC. My preferred pronouns are he, his, him, that guy, and his royal dudeness. 90s kid. Today's responsive reading comes from Naomi King. When prompted, please respond with the words, "Nurture this precious light." How shall we begin to live our free faith? Nurture this precious light. When we do, we are beacons of freedom, creating a safe place to rest, explore, and innovate. Nurture this precious light. How we keep this lamp of truth and justice affects how and whether we are transforming inequity through witness and action. Nurture this precious light. As we nurture this precious light together, we become a light of hope, turning isolation into community, anguish into peace, sorrow into joy. Nurture this precious light. As we do, our faith burns a steady flame of innovation, banishing illusion, creating new and renewing way together. Nurture this precious light. With our living connections, with our glowing stories, with our flame of freedom moving hand to hand, we nurture this precious light. Together, we turn this world from bleak into bright, one flame, one fire, one light at a time. Beloved members and guests, think about a time in your life, real or hypothetical, when you reached your lowest possible demeanor. You lost a loved one, health, job, house, a friend, or a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, or you simply failed to even achieve such fundamental societal norms. You lost every sense of stability and normalcy and couldn't imagine any sign of hope on your horizon. If time truly heals all matters, how long would it take you to breach this prison and reclaim your freedom of hope? A few days, weeks, months, or even years? How about 4 seconds? If you were in this state, change your demeanor and turn your life completely around in a span of 4 seconds? I know of someone who has, and it speaks to human credibility and capability. In the early 1980s, 2 brothers, Kevin and Jordan, were born in San Francisco. Tragically, both of their parents suffered from bipolar manic depression and heavy drug usage, and Jordan died from bronchitis when Kevin was just a few months old. From there, Kevin bounded throughout the foster system before being adopted, and at age 16, his parents divorced, and his high school drama teacher / mentor committed suicide. Shortly afterwards, Kevin himself was diagnosed as bipolar, became further manic, depressed, and paranoid, and would often binge drink into blackouts just to cope. On through it, and he graduated high school in 2000 at age 19. His constant fights with his mother caused him to move in with his father, whom he also fought with. And on 22nd of September 2000, he broke up with his girlfriend. Throughout the following weekend, he experienced voices and hallucinations and felt, quote, "I didn't believe that I deserved to live. I believed there was no other option but death by my own hands." On that Monday, he decided to follow through in the most effective way he knew how in San Francisco. Kevin was actually very elated that day, knowing he was going to end the pain. He persuaded his father to drive him to City College on Ocean Avenue, kissed him goodbye, and gave him a rare hug. From there, he took 2 buses out to the Golden Gate Bridge, sitting in the back, crying silently the whole way and thinking, "I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to die today," which saddened him, but the voices persisted, telling him, "You must die. You can't go back. You are a burden to those who love you." Even so, when he got to the bridge, Kevin paced on it, crying, hoping that someone would care enough just to stop and talk with him. Finally, after nearly 40 minutes, he climbed over the railing, took 3 hurtling steps, and jumped off head first. And yet somehow, in that first millisecond of free fall, a moment of clarity washed over him. What have I just done? I don't want to die. God, please save me. From a height of roughly 250 feet, Kevin was in the air for roughly 4 seconds. And somehow, He used that time to twist his body around into a seating position, hitting the water feet first at 130 kilometers an hour. He plunged into the freezing, drowning abyss in indescribable pain for having fractured 3 of his vertebrae. Yet somehow, instinctively, in spite of the pain, he found the strength to swim up to the surface and keep treading water for almost 20 minutes until he was rescued by a Coast Guard vessel. In the hospital, Kevin's father came to visit him, and although his father was known for his toughness, he was crying in front of Kevin like a young child. That alone was an epiphany to Kevin. You have to live. Fight this every day until you get better, even if you don't get better, if nothing but for your family. Simple exposure to another's grief by his actions was enough to bring Kevin to terms with his own. Kevin's story of survival is nothing short of a miracle, and it doesn't end there, but sadly, far too many of us have gone through that same internal struggle and didn't have that 4-second gift. Robin Williams, Marilyn Monroe, David Foster Wallace, Anthony Bourdain, Mindy McCready, Kurt Cobain, Aaron Hernandez, Chris Cornell, Sawyer Sweeten, Jovan Belcher, Avicii, Tony Scott, Don Cornelius, Dana Plato, Jack London, and Chester Bennington, whom, by the way, you just heard singing the music for this service. And yet all these high-profile cases represent only a microcosm of a greater crisis. According to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, AFSP, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S., claiming almost 45,000 lives every year, roughly 123 every day, or 1 every 11 minutes. According to the CDC, in 2020, suicide was among the top 9 leading causes of death for people ages 10 to 64, and the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 14 and 23 to 34. The CDC reported that rates in the U.S. have been rising for the past century and reached a 30-year high in 2016. Although it affects all demographics, the rate is highest among veterans, people living in rural areas, sexual minorities, tribal populations, and people who have experienced violence, including adverse childhood experiences, such as physical abuse, bullying, or sexual violence. The rate is 4 times as high among males as females, but females attempt it 3 times as often as males. And the crisis affects more than the U.S. According to the Suicide Awareness Voices of Education, SAVE, suicide claims the lives of 800,000 people worldwide annually, and is the second leading cause of death for people ages 15 to 24. But according to the WHO, rates are actually higher in high-income nations like ours. Even these statistics underlay a broader epidemic. According to the AFSP, for every 1 suicide in this nation, there are 25 attempts. Nearly half of all LGBTQ youth have seriously considered suicide, and more than half of transgender males reported having attempted it. And as numerous celebrities have shown, even having massive recognition and admiration is no protection. How can those who brought so much joy and entertainment to so many lives still be unable to find serenity in their own? It's almost the perfect assassin. Swift, unpredictable, merciless, and seemingly unstoppable. And of all God's creatures, we humans are the only ones on this planet that commit solely to end personal suffering, one only our species can understand. I'm not proud to admit that for a long time I had little sympathy for suicide victims, at least in America, one of the wealthiest nations on the planet, with all the luxuries and basic necessities that most of the world's population can only aspire to have. What possible excuse could so many people benefiting from this birthright fortune have to abruptly squander it? And how could so many people believe that the trauma driving them to such extreme release is somehow greater than that experienced by the countless loved ones affected by it? This was before I learned of the primary causes of this epidemic and how drastically it undermines the perception of personal choice. And it was even longer before 2 of my own co-workers of completely different age groups and backgrounds both committed this act. Trying to find the single root cause of this crisis would be a gross oversimplification, but according to the National Association of Mental Illness, NAMI, roughly 90% of the victims have a mental illness of some kind. Depression is the primary symptom, followed by anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, personality disorders, and traumatic experiences, especially PTSD. Similarly, the CDC has developed a list of primary risk factors, including social isolation, financial or job problems, impulsive or aggressive tendencies, adverse childhood experiences, bullying, relationship problems, or sexual violence. Community and societal factors include barriers to health care, the stigma associated with mental illness or help seeking, and easy access to lethal means, like firearms. And nearly all of these symptoms have a common precursor: isolation. Without any social connection or engagement, those experiencing some such symptoms have no one to pull them back from the edge and prove to them their own self-worth. And according to SAVE and NAMI, only half of all Americans experiencing mental illness receive treatment for it. Kevin is only one example. Recall that just before his jump, Kevin was pacing on that bridge for almost 40 minutes, not hoping the suicidal thoughts would subside, but just that someone would notice and care enough to stop and talk with him. How can this epidemic be so widespread if it can be treated, at least temporarily, by something as simple as reaching out? This alludes to another widespread but often overlooked health issue. According to a 2020 report from MD Links, up to 47% of adults experienced loneliness, double the number affected from just a few decades ago. And according to the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, more than 40% of adults aged 45 and older feel lonely, and nearly 25% of adults aged 65 and older are considered socially isolated. And similar to suicide, LGBTQ and immigrant populations are at a higher risk. This isolation may seem impossible in an era of mass communication when most of us, myself included, are unconsciously addicted to our smartphones, until we realize that having simple virtual connection is no substitute for authentic human connection. Although loneliness and social isolation may seem trivial, the CDC has found they greatly increase a person's risk of premature death from all causes, and are associated with a roughly 50% increase in dementia, 29% increased risk of heart disease, 32% increased risk of stroke, and higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. As expected, loneliness has only increased during the COVID-19 pandemic, and new CDC data released this March reveals that teen mental health has declined further, with roughly 37% of high school students saying they experienced poor mental health, and 44% reported feelings of sadness and hopelessness. In an era marred by political polarization, climate change, racial injustice, assaults on democracy, rising authoritarianism, ongoing conflicts in Ukraine, Middle East, and North Africa, global refugee movements, and other existential crises facing us today, who wouldn't long for greater social connection or question their own value? I myself have struggled with such anxiety by existential questions of my own self-worth in the face of the insurmountable environmental crises facing us today and my own utterly lackluster achievements in addressing them, compared to almost everyone else in my age group that I've met. As a 40-year-old with no house or significant other, only brief intermittent friendships, and barely 8 years of full-time professional career experience, what intrinsic benefit to society could I claim? Although I have as yet survived the COVID-19 pandemic, I've had my share of survivor's guilt when comparing my life to the now over 1 million Americans who tragically did not. What divine omnipresence could possibly rationalize any twisted logic that my own life was somehow more valuable than any of theirs? If countless people who have accomplished more than I could ever aspire to in my life could still fall victim to suicide, how safe am I or any number of my peers from a similar fate? This incites a more fundamental question. What truly gives value to one's life? Some struggle with this conundrum their entire lives, and some can only find it through cheap thrills and escapes. We can never forget how our first two Unitarian Universalist principles, recognizing and supporting the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, remind us of how valuable every human life is. How can we instill this recognition and confer this faith in those who don't see it in themselves, or believe the pain of their current struggle outweighs that of their friends and loved ones in their passing? And even when we achieve the social stature we struggle for constantly, as friends move and drift apart and time separated exceeds time spent together, how long can this sense of worth truly last? Perhaps even more precarious is the danger of seeming insensitive in our all but futile attempts to empathize with coming from a relatively privileged background of social worth and loving relationships to the unfathomable struggles overbearing enough to someone to fracture their own fundamental biological instinct of self-preservation. Maslow's hierarchy of needs places love and belonging and esteem as vital to self-actualization. Why should we consider them any less important as psychophysiological factors like health, lifestyle, and shelter? Like food, lifestyle, and shelter. In confronting the suicide epidemic and the causes thereof in this regard, perhaps the question is not how much time would it take, but what would it take for someone to turn their life around? Kevin's story may offer some profound insight in this conundrum. While Kevin was still recovering in the hospital, his father stayed with him, sleeping on a cot in Kevin's hospital room for 3 weeks. During this time, his father convinced a local priest to visit as well, who soon regularly visited him. The priest encouraged Kevin to talk about what he had been through, and eventually convinced him to share it publicly for the first time to a group of 7th and 8th graders in Kevin's old middle school. Shortly after he presented his story, he received over 120 letters thanking him, several of which were from children who were suicidal at the time, and had received help just from hearing his story. From there, Kevin went on to create the Kevin Hines Foundation, a nonprofit organization devoted to helping potential and attempted suicide victims and others with mental illness, and still travels the world sharing his story of healing and recovery. He also sits on the boards of the International Bipolar Foundation, the Bridge Rail Foundation, Mental Health Association of San Francisco, and the Survivors Committee of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And in 2016, Mental Health America awarded Kevin their highest honor, the Clifford W. Beers Award, for his efforts to improve the lives of and attitudes towards people with mental illness. All this began from simply taking the opportunity to tell his story. Since its opening in 1937, of the more than 1,200 people who have jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, only 29 are believed to have survived, and only a few have regained full mobility. We cannot overlook the perverse irony that such horrific fatal escapes from the pain of isolation would be executed on such an iconic structure specifically engineered to help bring people together. Kevin is one of those fortunate few survivors, but even he admits, quote, "You don't ever really cure mental illness. I still get the voices, the panic attacks, and I still feel suicidal at times. It's just like alcoholism. I'm in recovery and I've got to fight it every day." But he further emphasizes that people who die by suicide or attempt suicide don't truly want to die. They may say the word want, but they don't. The psychosis brings them to the point of believing they have to. We may never be truly capable of understanding the struggle those enduring such mental health issues deal with every day. But each of us knows that hope is a dwindling resource in a time beset by climate change, war, disease, poverty, and racism, and now newfangled assaults on our fundamental reproductive rights and environmental protections. And each of us knows the pain of feeling there's nobody to reach out to. If every social encounter we have is ultimately an immaterial dream, nothing more than a fading memory as time apart exceeds time together, how valuable is one life in an increasingly crowded and chaotic world? Although we can never discount Kevin's miraculous recovery, we must never discount the power each of us wields in creating the social beacon so many people suffering from mental illness and isolation need in their darkest hour. As ubiquitous as this issue is, we know that suicide is preventable. The National Institute of Mental Health has a fact sheet on suicide prevention, which I will gladly share. The most effective actions we can take to prevent it are simple. The first being listening for the symptoms. The most common of which is talking about wanting to die or saying they have no reason to live, feeling empty or hopeless, shame or guilt, or seeking revenge. Other symptoms include mood swings, eating and sleeping disorders, alcohol and drug use, or withdrawing socially. Both the CDC and helpguide.org have similar advice when approaching suicidal people. Listen for the signs, take them seriously, express your support and concern, be sympathetic and non-judgmental, offer to teach them coping and problem-solving skills, and offer them hope. On the broader communal level, we can work to strengthen economic support like housing stabilization, improve access to health care, create protective community-based environments that reduce access to lethal means, and promote connectedness through community engagement activities. But most of all, be willing to provide them with the resources to prevent them from attempting, including the National Prevention Hotline. If you or someone you know is demonstrating suicidal symptoms, please call the hotline 988 as soon as possible. Contrary to popular myth, offering someone the resources to prevent suicide doesn't increase their likelihood of attempting it. In fact, the sheer act of expressing concern may convey the sense of self-worth needed to dissuade them. In July 2021, Cornell University published a research paper, Strategies to Stay Alive, Adaptive Toolboxes for Living Well with Suicidal Behavior. The authors presented a series of interviews with suicidal individuals of various demographics to capture their voices. Each interviewee described a similar journey of fighting the temptation to end their lives, contending with ambivalent periods of not caring whether they lived or died, and accepting suicidal ideation as part of their persona. But most noteworthy of the study were the diverse coping strategies that diverged from conventional strategies. These included having pets, engaging with the arts, meditation, and spiritual practices. Hope figured largely into their decisions to set aside suicidal thoughts, whether for their own future or that of the world the next generation will inherit. Most of all, the study encouraged the propagation of community outreach and engagement opportunities for those with suicidal behavior to help them cope with it. A similar 2020 report by the National Association for Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention identified what most suicide attempt survivors want their peers to know. Many don't even want to talk about the stigma of suicidal thoughts that so few of us can empathize with because it can further alienate them socially or even jeopardize their career. But you can and should ask those with suicidal ideations how they're feeling. And don't be afraid to use the word suicide, or even if you don't know what to say. Often, simply listening and showing compassion without assumptions can reduce suicidal impulses by making them feeling more connected. Remember, suicidal thoughts themselves aren't necessarily about a desire to die, but merely to end the pain and stress of a recent traumatic experience or a current circumstance. As Kevin Hines demonstrated, just enabling people to share their stories of recovery can save lives, both of the teller and the listeners. And the NAMI has also found through several studies that having a greater sense of community connection can improve one's mental health throughout their lives, something we all need. To be clear, there is no universal panacea to cure the suicide epidemic. Despite the common symptoms of isolation and mental illness, the reasons for suicide are as diverse as the personal struggles each of us carry. But we all still share that same fundamental human need to connect in times of joy and grief. And as UUs, our faith compels us to believe in a brighter future for this world and every inhabitant, not in spite of the innumerable crises facing humanity today, but because of them, and to instill that hope throughout our community. The greater the worldly issue, the more opportunities available for even those who think the least of themselves to join in the struggle against it, and in doing so, prove their value, even if they're only to themselves. Self-worth is vindicated not from what we get from this world, but what we can give to it. Paradoxically, each of us can find value in our life when we realize that it's not just our own, but a gift from the universe to itself. This perhaps most vindicates our first UU principle. The worth and dignity of every person can be ignited by granting them the opportunity to contribute to their community and ultimately the greater world. What's needed is the sacred beacon of hope that each of us has the power to ignite and reciprocate that worth as it spreads through the connections we create like sunshine through a prism. Combating this crisis is an ongoing effort. Even those brought back from the edge still have to struggle with their personal suicidal thoughts every day often. But as Kevin Himes demonstrated, all still have the potential to instill an abundance of wisdom, courage, and love with the time they have, and show them that every moment is worth living because every person is a gift to this world. In that spirit, I implore you to all become the beacon so desperately needed now. Reach out to those in your community who are feeling lonely and disconnected. Show them the opportunities to engage with their community, whether through our own social justice committee or other volunteer organizations here in Maryland. When necessary, follow the prevention strategies identified earlier. Listen, empathize, express support and concern. Offer them the resources to save themselves, and be the sacred beacon you would want to see. Although we may never know what drives someone to the edge of self-preservation, we can take some comfort in that we also never know what can draw them back. Even if we cannot save every suicide victim or delay their death indefinitely, we can spread the light of hope that vindicates and awakens the potential in every human, reminding them their lives are more than what they comprehend, and not only theirs to bear. Just as every candle's light only grows when shared, every person we reach and connect with our faith can reciprocate that faith, become a beacon of hope for others who may need it eventually, including ourselves, and in turn add value to their own lives. In doing so, we can honor and respect the struggle of those who left us intentionally too early, and appreciating, however limited, the time and the gifts they gave us. And even as family, friends, and fellowship retire, relocate, and fade into memories, our faith compels us to believe that the light we shared will resonate with a brilliant radiance that can outshine any period of grief and even our own mortality. I'll conclude with this quote from LGBTQ mental health advocate, journalist, and suicide attempt survivor, Sam Dillon Finch. You're still here, and whatever the reason might be, you still have a chance to do something extraordinary with this life. My greatest wish for you, and for anyone who's grieving, is to know that your pain doesn't have to consume you, even if you live with it. Let that be your compass that leads you to new and exciting places. Let it bring you closer to your purpose. Let it remind you how precious your own being is. You're part of the legacy that your loved one left behind. And every moment you choose to live fully and love deeply, you bring a beautiful part of them back to life. Fight for your own life the way you so desperately wish you could have fought for theirs. You are just as worthy, I promise you. My fellow UUs, I need to believe that this promise is worth keeping and living every day. Amen. Shalom. Alhamdulillah. Namaste. Blessed be. Let's conclude with our closing hymn, hymn number 10, Immortal Love.
Immortal love, forever full, forever flowing free, forever shared, forever whole, and never-ending sea. All outward lips confess the name, all other names above, but love alone knows whence it came, and comprehendeth love. Blow winds of love, awaken, blow the mists of hate away. Sing out a truth divine, and tell how wide and far we stray. The letter fails, the systems fall, and every symbol wanes. The Spirit overseeing all, eternal love remains.
As we extinguish our chalices today, let us carry forth the spiritual fires we have kindled within ourselves into this world, to become the sacred beacons of hope needed now and for many days to come. Join one of our communities, support community outreach, and reach out to those near the edge of hope. And regardless of how long our experiences together and memories from them last, our shared lights will illuminate our darkest hours. For as Emerson would say, only in darkness can we see the stars. Thank you.
When you were standing in the wake of devastation, when you were waiting on the edge of the unknown, and with the cataclysm raining down, insides crying, save me now, you were there impossibly alone. Do you feel cold and lost in desperation? You build up hope, but failure's all you've known. Remember all the sadness and frustration, and let it go.
So I have a couple announcements, and